What if the version of you've been chasing is actually the one you've been trying to return to all along? The one before the noise, before the burnout, before you started shrinking to fit a life that never really fit you. This isn't about starting over. It's about returning. Returning to your soul, returning to your truth, the version of you that has always been meant to be. Each week, we're going to offer up real stories, hard-earned wisdom, and practical tools from powerful returns to help you reconnect with who you are and why you're here. I'm your host, Bryan White, and this is The Return Project. We're sitting down with Sandra Cooze. She's here to share a story of absolute redemption, living through a life of trauma, pain, and experiences that led her to realize she had so much to give and how to help others walk through that trauma and to revitalize their life and come back to the place of fully living a thriving, authentic, beautiful life. So Sandra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Bryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sandra, I would love to dive right into the deep end here and have you take the floor, share with our audience, where did it all begin?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Germany and everything that happened to me happened there. It started when I was 12. My mother made a childhood dream come true. She made it possible for me to take care of a pony, and which 12-year-old girl doesn't love horses, right? So I was at the stables Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there was the stable master who had promised my mother that he would take care of me, make sure that I know what to do with the horses, that I wouldn't get kicked or bitten, and all those things. So I loved it. I loved being out with the horses. I loved the smell. I loved the air. It was heaven for me. Then one day the stable master asked if I wanted to ride on his horse, because it's great to take care of a pony, but those big horses, I mean, oh my God, those were like a dream for me to have one day. And so of course I said yes. So the next time when I was at the stables, he had his horse and I was sitting on it and he was walking next beside us. And we're walking along meadows and other horses and see the fields. And it was a hot summer's day. It was dusty. And we kept on walking for a good, I would say 10, 15 minutes. And then he stopped at a little shed. And he said that he just had to go inside and get something and he wanted to give the horse a rest. And 12-year-old me, who was taught adults are always right, of course, I believed and trusted him. So we went inside the shed and it was dark, it was dusty, there was a workbench in one corner and an old office chair, and on the other side was like a day bed with a rough blanket, and he asked me to sit down there. So I did, and he was rummaging around on the other side, and at some point he kept walking towards me, sitting next to me, and he asked me if I had a boyfriend, which I thought was odd, but I didn't make much of it. So I told him yes. Of course, as a 12-year-old, I didn't really have a boyfriend, but something close to that, I guess, age-wise. And he asked me then if he had ever kissed me. And I said yes, on a cheek. And then he wrapped his arm around me and he kissed me on the cheek. And it made me feel very uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything because I was afraid. So then his hand moved down my arm and came to rest underneath on my breast. And he started stroking it. And that's when I completely froze up. I didn't like it. I didn't know what he did. I mean, how could I have known? I was 12 years old playing with Barbies. How could I have known what he was doing? So I endured that for I don't know how long. And at some point then his other hand was starting to move up my leg. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew exactly I did not want him to touch the part where he was moving. So I pushed his hand away and thank God he never touched me there. But he kept on stroking my breast and kissing me on my cheek. So after a while, I mustered all my strength and I said, should we go back? And he just whispered, not yet. And just kept on going, and his breathing changed, and I just felt more and more uncomfortable. Now, after a while, we then left, but to this day, I do not remember how I got home. I mean, I must have taken a bus because that's what I've always done, but this is a complete blank. I don't know what happened from the moment we left the shed until I was home. So my mind is suppressing that, and I don't know why. But that day, my boyfriend, came over and he saw I was distressed and he asked me what was going on. And after him prodding a little, I told him and he said, "You need to tell your parents." And I was like, "No, I'm afraid I'm not doing that. What if they're upset with me?" He said, "They won't be. Go talk to them." So my mother came home. He went with me and I told her. She said, "Don't go there anymore." And that was the only thing that I got. Now, back then, I would have needed so much from her, like a hug, saying, "It's okay, I've got you." Today, I understand that she was overwhelmed with the situation. She didn't know what to do. The only thing she knew was, don't go there anymore. Like, get out of that situation. But back then, it was very hard to deal with that. So the next day, my mother and I went to the stables to pick up my things. And she must have talked to the owner because it was her friend. So the stable master wasn't there. And she asked me to wait outside while she was going inside to talk to them and get all my things. All the while, all those girls who were taking care of the other horses came around and circled me and were telling me things like it was my fault because I was so quiet and he would never do that to them. And he's a nice guy. And how could I say things like that? So basically trying to make me feel like it was my fault, me as the victim. That sat very badly with me for many years. That was the first thing that happened. The second thing happened when I was 14. Now, growing up in Germany, we used to always go hiking in Austria, and we loved it. It was always the same place. It was a hotel up high in the mountains, and it's my grandparents started that tradition, and we just kept on going. And it was like the highlight of the year every year. And the owner of the hotel always loved to have welcome shots with the guests who arrived. So, and since the hotel was always booked out during holiday season, you can imagine how drunk he always became at night. I'm surprised that he could still walk, but he also had the advice that he loved to fondle women's breasts. It was an open secret. It was the 80s, so he didn't mean anything else, just that like a handshake. That's what he did, but fondling women's breasts. Well, one day, my parents were looking at new accommodations they were building, and he was to watch over us. Well, and that day he decided he wanted to touch my breast, and I said no, and I ran away, and he came after me. For him, it was a game. For me, it was sheer terror. So luckily, he never got to touch me because finally my parents returned. So I ran to them and said, "Well, this is what happened." And my mother played it down. She was trying to diffuse the situation in a laughing manner, like, "You can't do this to my daughter. She doesn't know you don't mean anything by it." So back then I was furious. Now I understand what she was doing. So, but anyways, then when I was 16, we had a sexual assault class in school. And that's when those two incidents came back into my consciousness. Before I had completely blocked them out. They came back into my consciousness. I remembered every little thing, every touch, every breath. And this time I understood what happened. So that was re-traumatizing because I also understood how I felt dismissed, how I felt left alone. I didn't get the support I needed. I remember I asked my mother, "Why didn't we go to the police? Why didn't we do that?" And she said, "Well, I wanted to protect you. I didn't want you to have to share the story again in front of a lot of people in court." And I thought, you know what? I was 12 years old, but I knew it was wrong and I wanted to have my say. So that was one thing that gnawed at me for a long time. Didn't get the chance to speak up and that he gets justice because he didn't get any justice because my mother did not allow that. I understand why she did that, but she should have asked. That's always the thing that I come back and she should have asked me what I wanted to do. All right. Then started the bullying in school. I was bullied from the age of 16 to 17 for a good year. Half of my class and half of the neighboring class. It was nothing extreme like you see today. It was like kicking in the break room while I was reading. I was always the loner or spitballs. And the crescendo was when I was writing a letter to my pen pal and I told her that I had my first boyfriend, how excited I was and everything. And they stole this letter out of my backpack, made copies and distributed it in the whole school. So that was the crescendo. And that's where the teachers finally stepped in. And that ended that with this letter that ended the whole bullying. And they were trying to be a little nicer. Then between the age from 19 to 25, I was sexually assaulted multiple times. Two incidents stand out. The first one was at work. I was doing a I was learning a trade, hotel business in Germany. And in doing that, we work in the field while going to school, which is nice because you get paid while you do your education instead of paying for it. But I always love being of service. And you have to go through every stations in the hotel, and the restaurant was leased out to Italians. And they had no sense of personal boundaries. So we had a changing room that had no lock. So they knew exactly when I was changing, and this one waiter was always coming in, standing there, leaning in the doorway and watching while I was changing. There was nothing I could do, and I was already too traumatized to think that if I said something, anyone would help me. So I stayed quiet. One time, my mother called, and I was in the ladies' room. He came in with the phone, handed the phone to me under the stall. So that was ridiculous, but that's what he did. Then the second sexual assault that stood out or still stands out is I was dancing in a Cuban club with some friends, and I was asked to dance by a young Cuban man. And while he was dancing with me, he pushed me really close to his so I could feel his penis rubbing against my vagina and growing. And I tried pushing him away and he wouldn't let go. So I had to endure this until the dance was done. So I went back to my friends and I said, why did we saw that? Why didn't you push it away? Well, why didn't they help me? Why didn't they come and intervene? Why didn't they see that I was trying to get away? The last thing that happened at 22, I was raped. I was raped from the best friend of my then boyfriend. And for the longest time, I thought it was my fault because all three of us, we were always spending the weekends together, and we had game night and we were drinking. It was January. My boyfriend went home because he had to get up early to go to work. They were both in the military. And I decided to stay at his friend's house to sober up before I drove home because driving intoxicated on slippery roads is not a good idea.
Nope.
So I was fully clothed in sweatpants and a baggy t-shirt, and I was sleeping in this huge queen size bed. So 3 people could have easily fit between us. So he was there and I was here. So it was a lot of room in between. I felt safe because I'd known him for like 6 months, and he never made any attempt at flirting with me or showing that he wanted anything. Well, before I know it, he started to fondle my breasts. And I told him to stop. I told him I don't want that. And after me pushing him away long enough, like 10, 15 minutes, he finally stopped. And I thought he got the message. So at first I was mortified, but then I started to get angry because how dare he? I trusted him. And then I said, well, do you still want me, or can I go to sleep now? Well, for some reason that can I go to sleep now, he must not have heard, because before I knew it, my hands were down and he was inside. So luckily I was able to push him off of me, and that finally woke him up, but the damage was already done. So I just grabbed my things and went to my boyfriend and told him what happened. And he said, he's not best friend. I'm not going to do anything about it. So that was the end of that relationship.
I was going to say, I hope so.
So that was all the abuse that happened. And then about 2-3 years after I was raped, I went to see a psychologist because I didn't like the person I had become. I was just staying home, secluding. I gained so much weight just to make myself invisible because everything that happened was when I was thin. So of course, this is protection. And I went to the psychologist, and in my intake session, I shared everything that happened. And at the end of it, she was saying, well, I believe you already worked through it all. What am I supposed to do? He was not trauma informed.
I can't think of a therapist that would have the position to be able to say you've worked through it all, because there's no way coming from that amount of trauma that even now to this day, anybody could ever say you've worked through it all.
Well, he seemed very chauvinistic. And he had no idea about trauma. Just because I wasn't bawling my eyes out doesn't mean I had healed. It just means I had myself under control. So anyways, after that day, I hit rock bottom. That was it. Deserted by family, deserted by friends, even by the mental professionals. They're supposed to know how to help me get better. They all deserted me. And then I had 2 choices. I could stay down rock bottom, maybe get into alcohol or drugs, or even worse, or climb back out. I climbed back out, and I found my way of healing. Now, I had 2 very distinct moments of suggestion from friends that helped me on my journey of understanding that without them knowing what they did. But other than that, I had to find my way, and I did.
Love to dive in a little bit more to what were some of the pivotal points that you realized you had to climb out? What were some of the moments then, some of the tools that you used to really take yourself into a new place because you just couldn't sit where you were?
Well, first comes the question, why me? What did I do to deserve this? I must have been so bad in my past life to be punished like this. And I think every trauma survivor at some point or another is asking that question. And then there was one key moment. It was my last boyfriend before I met my husband. And when he broke up with me, he said, I was just married to a woman with mental issues. I don't want to be dating one. Now, he did not say this me. He was just stating a fact. And seriously, I'm so grateful he did. Because for the first time, I was looking at all my relationships up to this point, and I was looking at what I was doing in those relationships. And I realized that I was sabotaging each and every one of them. Because I always was looking for the knight in shining armor, the man who's just going to marry me and rescue me, and I'm finally off the market and I have someone who's taking care of me. But at the same time, I was terrified of being loved because whenever I loved, it always went sideways. Whenever I loved, they deserted me. Whenever I trusted someone, I was abused, I was raped, I was molested, and everything in between.
How did you find that How did you find that your trust in people was you were able to overcome that? I'm just sitting here having a moment going, if I was ever in those kind of positions, I don't know that I'd be able to ever trust people in the right way to even have relationships.
Yes, I can, but not right away. I am cautious. Not cautious because I'm still traumatized, but cautious because their trauma can cause something else in me. Because we all deal with trauma. But yes, when I think about my husband, for example, when we were married, I was still deeply traumatized. He didn't know anything of my story, but I had intimacy issues. Like, meaning sometimes he touched me in a certain way and I was like, ew, no, I can't. Like I was being triggered. My body was reacting to a certain word or how he said it or a touch. And I didn't understand it then. But no matter what, he was hands off. As soon as I said no, he was hands off. And this was the greatest gift he could give me because it allowed me to completely heal from intimacy issues. So yes, and this helped our relationship to really go deeper and deeper. So there's so much trust and comfort in our relationship that you only get when you really go to the deepest, darkest parts of your being and hash them out.
When trying to develop those trust and intimacy recovery pieces, did you find that you had to relive experiences again to recover from that trauma? Or how did you start to find ways and what were some of your tools that you used to overcome those traumas and to really take those steps forward?
Well, both. Usually with triggers or flashbacks. They're not necessarily images, they're emotions. So what I've learned through my ex-boyfriend was self-reflection, to go inward and ask, okay, what is this? What am I feeling right? Why am I feeling like this? Not being afraid of how I'm feeling because it doesn't feel great, but to really dive deep and understand it. And this is what I've always done, like always trying to understand, why am I behaving like this? Why did I just lash out at my husband? Why is my body saying no? My mind is saying yes, please. So tools usually are self-reflection, understanding why you feel the way you do. And that was the biggest help in my healing journey. And flashbacks, sometimes when they come up as images, it's tough, but it's something that's already happened and they really show a clue of why. And then as you understand that and as you learn to understand it, you're already starting to release it. So it's a journey in itself.
Always a journey. I think what were some of the pieces that allowed you to rebuild your confidence in your self image? And how did you really start to rediscover your own self love? As you kind of talked about, as you had gone to the therapist because you had gained some weight because you wanted to build that, as we might commonly know, that safety net, trying to make yourself unapproachable, essentially. How did you really manage to take that step forward and realize that instead of trying to make yourself unapproachable, you had to rediscover your self love so you could love other people again?
There was one moment when I was standing in front of a mirror and looking at myself. I had tried to lose weight and gained it all back and lost it again. And it came back, the yo-yo effect. And I was looking at myself and I was trying to picture how it would feel if I was thin. And I was terrified. I was terrified of being thin. And that's when it really clicked. It's like in order to be the person I want to be that makes me happy, I have to release the root cause. And that is the trauma, like the fear of being thin, not the trauma necessarily, but the effect it had. So, and that's when self-love came into play, because the more I focused on releasing the fear of being thin, the more the self-love came up. And at some point I realized I love myself so much unconditionally, no matter how I look. And that made me feel good about myself because I finally found a connection again with myself. Because when you're being traumatized, it's like there's a disconnect between your body and your soul. So your soul is over here and your body is there, and there's two entities. That's why we feel like something is missing or something was taken from us. But the more we heal, the more those connect. And once we really connect that, we are one entity again. And that we're whole. And once I reached that wholeness, came that self-love. And with that self-love came that self-confidence. And with that self-confidence came the courage. And then, of course, came setting boundaries and learning to say no and feeling good about that. And really, I was starting to release everything that was holding me back. So I really went, without noticing, I went deep into limiting beliefs. Whenever something was like moving, like, I don't know, rubbing me the wrong way, I looked at it. Why? Why did that just trigger me? And so it went faster and faster. They released all those triggers and up came this amazing person that has already been in there just waiting to come out.
So you started making all these changes and creating this really powerful self-love. What kind of doors did that start to open for you, and new experiences that did that allow you to have once you opened and overcame those beliefs? In what spaces of your life did you find you were able to grow into, and how did it just transform you once you really took that journey of self-love on?
Well, with that journey of self-love came the love for other people, for humanity as a whole. And I started to see more and more how much trauma there really is. And I started to realize people have no clue how to heal. They don't know. And here I am, been through all that, understanding it all. What am I waiting for? That day Rise Above Your Story was born. So, and then I moved into the healing. So I'm not certified as a psychologist, social worker, anything. No, because life is my teacher. And I know how it feels to be deeply traumatized. And I know how it feels to be free of it. And this is what I'm taking with me in every session with every client that I have.
I would love to know if in any of your sessions with your client or whether with yourself, what are your thoughts on the power of forgiveness, gratitude, and grace? Where do you see in the healing journey, and how powerful is the ability to forgive yourself and forgive the people around you? Give yourself grace and see the gratitude in the world.
Interesting question. I like it. Well, forgiveness for oneself is so important, but it is a journey to get there. Because when you start with a healing journey, you're still in the victim mode. So you're still trying to find a reason why this had to happen. And self-blame is usually at the center of that, because it must have been something you did, because why would anyone in the world treat you like this? This is the first you have to overcome. So there's no room for forgiveness because you don't know who to forgive. Then you're in the survivor stage once you have a little distance and you start to see what happened without being in the story. Then you get angry. You get so angry at your attackers. You get so angry at what was taken from you, all the lives you lost, all the years. Because when you're in trauma, you lose all those years. I mean, I lost all my 20s where I could have been out dancing, having fun, exploring life. No, I was hiding away at home. Now I want to catch up to that in my 50s. But that's a normal part of that, because you realize what you have lost and what was taken from you. And then you're angry, and then you start to blame yourself because I should have, would have, could have. And that is tough, because then you blame yourself even more because you could have spoken up. You could have fought harder. Well, I don't know about you, but if you're like a woman and there's like a 200-300 muscle man, how can you fight against that? Not possible. But you have to come to the realization there was nothing you could have done. You did everything you could. And then once you get through the anger stage, then the real healing can happen. Because then you're on the other side. Then you're on the side where you understand it was never your fault. And then you start to give yourself grace and forgive yourself and let it go. Because you are anchored in your story. Every time you blame yourself, you're holding yourself in the story instead of forgiving yourself for holding on for so long and leaving it behind. That's the most pivotal moment in the whole healing journey, because this is what really catapults you forward. Unhooking this anchor from the past and throwing it into the future wherever it may land.
You touch a base on the anger portion there. A piece really fascinates me, and I really want to know, do you think that going through that stage of anger and essentially understanding or accepting that anger is healthy? Or do we have to find some other way to deal with it? Instead of getting angry, is there something else we should be doing? Or is honestly that little bit of anger good to release and good to experience?
Well, the anger in this sense is very important. It shows you something very special. You are no longer a victim of your trauma. You have been so unlinked from your trauma that a flashback doesn't re-traumatize you. A flashback doesn't terrify you. Those emotions that come up don't draw you back into the story. Now you're just freaking angry about it. This means you have detached yourself far enough that the trauma has no hold on you anymore. Now, yes, the anger is important, but some people are staying stuck in that anger for the rest of their life because they don't understand it. They don't understand that there's so much more beyond that anger. The anger is only a small part of your whole healing journey, but the anger is important because it helps you to stay detached from the story, not getting pulled back in. Because getting pulled back in is just as easy as letting go of the anger and moving on. It depends on what you're focusing on. If you only focus on the anger and don't understand its meaning, that it's actually an exciting moment. You're no longer a victim. You've been detached from your story so much you can actually feel something other than fear and pain and anguish. You can be angry at the person, angry at what happens, angry at what you think you've lost. That is important. But it's just as important to move past it. And this is a tough thing to do on your own, but I did it. So can other people.
Do you think there's a timeline, or would you tell somebody going through that experience where they've hit the anger stage, is there a point where you have to tell someone, okay, enough is enough, it's time to move on? How do you help someone not get stuck and live a life of anger? How do you help them take that step out of angry to now forgiveness and steps forward?
Well, usually when we're stuck in a phase, also the anger phase, it happens because of fear. So the one question I always ask is, what are you afraid of? Why are you so afraid of not being angry? Usually the answer is, I don't know who I am without my trauma. I don't know who I'm becoming. Because my sessions always talk about it's so beautiful up here. Come on, join me. You're free. You're confident. You don't take shit from anyone. I'm sorry. So it's liberation. But unless you have experienced this, you don't know what it feels like. It's the same thing with saying, well, you know when you find the right one. Well, yes, once you found it, you know. But until then, you have no idea what it feels like. It's the same thing with being free of trauma. Usually it's fear that's holding us back. Then we have to understand anger is only a mask. It's easier to be angry than to feel the actual emotions, which are guilt, shame, fear, judgment, and everything else. If we go deeper into the session, I ask them, okay, what do you actually feel? Usually it's guilt. Then there's shame because we don't like to tell the story of what someone did to us. Because for us, it's just shameful, even though it's not. It was their choice. We had nothing to do with that. They didn't care about us. They just did whatever they wanted, and we were there. Sorry, that was the camera. So
moving out of the spiral of anger and shame, and we've walked through our forgiveness, what do you share with people? And what is one of the pieces that you're going to tell somebody that allows them to step into a new life? They've now walked through their trauma. They've accepted it. They've moved through the stages and they're moving into a new life. But as you just said, they have no idea how to live without their trauma or who they are without their trauma. How do we help someone discover who they really are without trauma?
Well, the interesting thing from the healing journey is that the more you release, the more your true self is coming up. So you are changing, but you don't even realize that. So let's say you were a person who was always like staying behind, doesn't like to be asked questions, standing in the corner, not saying anything. And all of a sudden, you just speak your mind wherever you go. And you don't even realize you're doing that because this is your new normal. Because whatever stopped you from doing that has been released. And so that part is coming up and is integrating into who you are, and it just takes over. So healing is the only thing they have to do, and everything else is automatically happening. So actually I have to go back and I have to say, well, do you remember then and then what you were doing? Yes. Well, so look what you just did. And then they realize that they're actually speaking up and feeling confident with that. So I reverse engineer, go back with them like what they used to be, and then they realize how much they have changed, and it's not terrifying at all. No, it's great. It feels great. And as I see, and that's what this is. That's who you're turning into.
You managed to take your life into a direction of walking through each of these steps, accepting them, moving through them, and then realizing you were able to help other people do that. You took it one step further and put all of this pen to paper and turned it into a written project. I'd love to know more about how that was inspired and what's in that.
Sure. It all started with Reiki. I'm a very spiritual person. My whole healing journey was guided by spirituality. So of course, the way I help people also has some spiritual aspect in it. And I became a Reiki master 15 years ago. And in the beginning, I had a few clients and they always sat with me after so I could make sure they're grounded and they're feeling okay or okay to leave. And they always opened up to me, like for no reason at all. They just started talking about problems and their traumas and their therapy sessions. And so I always knew exactly what to tell them to help them shift. So I didn't realize it at that time that what I was doing was actually coaching, but it helped them. And a few of my clients were talking about their therapists. One was saying, well, I triggered my therapist in my session and I had to help my therapist through the trigger in my session. Now, if my therapist can't handle my story, how am I supposed to? That I heard a couple of times. And other times they said, well, they were dismissed just like I was. And I was like, this just can't be. This can't be it. This can't be that we have been traumatized and now this is a prison we have to live in for the rest of our lives. That just has to be a way. The body is self-healing. So it also must be healing on the mental level. And that's when I decided that I'm going to find a way to make that happen. I had no idea back then what that would mean. I mean, about 7 years ago, but that was the beginning of the journey. And now I'm helping my clients with deep trauma and PTSD with a modality called traumatic incident reduction, or TIR. It's the most amazing modality no one has ever heard of. It was created around the same time as EMDR. EMDR got all the funding, TIR got nothing, and that's why no one has ever heard of it. But this modality was specifically designed for deep trauma and PTSD. And I've seen amazing results with those for deep trauma. Then I developed my own trauma coaching approach where I use energy work together with talk therapy, and it works amazing. I've also been looking further like, okay, so it's our trauma. And then what? There's the limiting beliefs. There's the self-sabotaging behavior. There's the fears. There's the doubts. Where is this coming from? And I went into childhood, which means generational trauma. And I was like, okay, generational trauma. Where is the place of origin? It's in the ancestral trauma, which goes more into the spiritual aspect. So I designed the modality that goes into the ancestral trauma and release the trauma from there, like the energetic aspect of it, which is liberating for my clients. And I was my own guinea pig, of course. So the things that I released and how that has changed my life is phenomenal. Then I went on using more Reiki in my sessions and began to realize what a vital role the energy body plays in trauma. So whenever a trigger is coming up, it comes up with so much pent up energy. While they're talking about it, I'm pulling it out. I have them trigger free within minutes just by focusing on the energy while they're talking. So I designed Trauma Reiki, a new modality where I'm starting this year teaching other health practitioners how to use Reiki specifically for trauma release because it works so amazing well. So you see it as like little puzzle pieces that over the past 7 years all came together into this one huge package that helps people release every aspect of trauma, find themselves, release limiting beliefs, self-sabotaging behavior, set healthy boundaries, and really don't be afraid to speak up anymore and growing into their own confidence and who they are meant to be.
Beautiful. If you could go back and talk to younger you, what's one of the greatest pieces of advice or knowledge that you would share with a younger version of you?
You've got this. Literally, you've got this. Because I'm being asked the question a lot if I would go back in time and change anything. No. Because today I understand I had to go through everything I've been through so that I would know what it feels like. I would know how to heal. And now I could do what I was meant to do, help others. So there's nothing I would change. And the only word of advice I would give to my younger self is you've got this. That's all.
Is there anything that you have moving forward? What's on the go next for you? Do you have any new ideas moving into people with trauma and building more modalities or any other projects on the go?
Well, I'm working on my next book, which is Trauma Reiki, Awaken the Healer Within, which is the book that will lead into my course. And of course, I'm working on the second book of my trilogy, Journey to Yourself. And I think what is my future goal is to start teaching others, because why am I the only one knowing all this, doing all this? There should be so many more people who can start healing and helping people release the trauma from every angle. So I think for the future, this is my goal. Yes, working with people, of course, helping them, but also focusing on teaching others.
Well, this seems like a great place to bring the conversation full circle. And at the end of every one of my podcasts, I like to pose a really deep personal question. So Sandra, the question I throw out to everybody is, what is your true definition of living your best life?
That's an interesting question. For me, it's doing what I love, being in flow. So anything that blocks me mentally has no part in my life. I just leave that out. I focus on what I want to do every day and incorporate that in my life, depending on what this is. And every day is happy, living a happy life, and know you accomplish that by completely healing and getting to this point. Nothing is forced. Nothing is difficult because you choose that it is a good life. You build it from within. And that's what I did.
Said. I love it. Sandra, it has been an absolute pleasure to get to connect with you. And I just know that you are touching so many souls and helping incredible people walk through their journey of trauma to be able to live their best lives. So thank you so much for what you do. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Bryan. It was a pleasure.
That's a wrap on today's episode. A heartfelt thank you to our guests for showing up with honesty, depth, and wisdom. And thank you for listening in. I hope something in this conversation stirred something in you, a memory, a reminder, or maybe even a return to a part of yourself that's been waiting. If you enjoyed this episode, can I ask a quick 30-second favor? Share it with someone you know, someone who might need to hear this message too. And don't forget to explore past episodes. There's so much more waiting for you there. Until next time, I'm your host, Bryan White, and this is The Return Project.